marks the end of a 2-year journey, a collaboration between the University of Melbourne and University Kebangsaan Malaysia, two research universities coming together to solve a critical question against critical cyber attacks. We collected a considerable amount of empirical data around how Malaysian critical infrastructures, predominantly in banking and telecommunications, how they behaved when they're under cyber attack. From that evidence, we built a maturity model, which we then tested against the Malaysian government, against Malaysian industry, and against Malaysian academics. And that rigorous testing, combined with the output, which was this maturity model, really gave us like an important artifact around which we could build a significant contribution to Malaysia.
The model that's been developed by University of Melbourne with UKM really presents something that corporations like myself are keen to explore. Simply because we've seen a few things, some concepts in the maturity model that are appealing. For example, there is this idea about the use of situational awareness, right? And this idea of taking something from the military sort of environment appeals because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is like a war, right? Being able to have a good situational awareness, having the right intelligence, knowing what is going on, at the end of the day is absolutely critical for organizations because you need to know what you're up against, right? In order to, you have to measure it, and you have to be able to determine where it is in order to be able to fight against it and defend against it. So I think what we are really counting on this model is to not just focus on compliance, which models have tended to be, but really look at defense and something a bit more practicable, right? Which is what organizations typically looking for in this situation.
The model that was proposed by the team was interesting because, again, it focused on strategic thinking, decision-making, and how you deal with threat intelligence on an organization scale, and even extending that to the national level. Now, using that as a reference model is very important for organizations because at the core, it's about decision-making.
We believe that this maturity model will be one of the tools available for the industry to use as fit to their environment in measuring where they are, what are their gaps, and where should they prepare for in terms of raising their cybersecurity base.
I think it's something that is very important for UKM to have a strong partnership with a very reputable university like University of Melbourne, and in a way this will enhance our research progress and research activities, especially towards something that is very important to the country as well, such as cyber security. So we hope we can in a way continue the collaboration and expand it to other disciplines and other fields.
I think university has to look into that cybersecurity is just not on science technology aspect. Every other discipline must have certain cybersecurity element in it, number one. Number two, research shall not just on technical cybersecurity research. There are, I think, one of it on the element of social engineering. There's also cybersecurity elements with that as well. So I think universities, I mean, this effort initiative by UKM and University of Melbourne is one of the initiatives that is it's kind of out of the box research study, which many feels that it is not a priority, but in actual fact, the maturity model that you're producing is one of the priority. Every single day that I do, I will say, how do we gonna support this in terms of our talents?
It's the it's the relationships that we built with the university, the sustainability of it, and the fact that we transferred our knowledge and our methods to University Kebangsaan Malaysia. And that was one of the major objectives as set by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, our major funding partner, is that we were here for the long run in order to pass this capability on so that the local universities would be able to continue this project. And I think we were successful in doing that. today marks the end of a 2-year journey.
Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing, testing. Yeah, yes, all clear. Yeah, no feedback. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Take it off. Okay. There we go.
No, it's okay, sir.
You want me to keep it on?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
J mute. Number 1 mute.
So, okay. LinkedIn, yeah. Easy. AD, not ED. AD, yeah. I should be... No. Wow. I should be certainly not in your.
Definitely, you can't find the. Yeah.
Wow.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed your lunch. And now we can continue with the fruitful talks with Professor Atif Ahmed on the topic of sustainable development with the integration of information systems, particularly focusing on the cybersecurity challenges in developing countries. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ahmed to the stage.
Testing, yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And a very good afternoon to you. So I'm going to begin by actually inviting you to come and visit us at the University of Melbourne. And I'm going to show you some of my favorite pictures just to entice you, to give you some idea of what it's going to be like when you get there. There are many reasons to come to the University of Melbourne. One of the key ones is how gorgeous our campus is, right? The old, in various seasons of the year, combined with the new, and I'll show you a building in a moment, the one there where we reside. But some information about our university. We've got around 50,000 students, about 100 plus research centers, $670 million this year in research funding, 80% of which comes from medical research. So we are a medical research-centered university, and that actually sort of forms the backdrop of my conversation today. We are ranked number 13 in the world this year, depending on which ranking you're taking. We're taking the QS ranking. And I and my University of Melbourne team here, wave your hands, Sean Maynard, Scott Ainsley, and Dr. Munir Al-Sheikh, our former PhD student, is here, and so I'd really invite you to meet them and have a conversation with them. Today's topic is about information systems for sustainable development. When Mazen said to me, hey, you want to come to Saudi and attend our very first inaugural AIS conference, I jumped up at the opportunity. I never go to conferences, like almost never. The last conference I went to in AIS was 2017, the ISIS in Korea. So that gives you an idea of how rare my appearances are. But this was a really special opportunity, and one that I was very, very keen on taking up. And when Mazen asked me, what do you want to actually do in the conference? I was like, I'm not going to present a paper. I'm definitely not going to present a paper. I'm going to talk about my passion. And because my passion relates really closely to what I want to do in Saudi Arabia and who I want to work with and the message that I have for Saudi researchers. So my passion is I study how organizations behave when they're under cyber attack. So although I'm an IS researcher, or people call me an IS researcher, I'm actually a cyber researcher who's decided that IS is the best way to solve some really wicked, complex problems that affect the world. I started off, my PhD was in computer science and digital forensics, and I became really disillusioned with computer science because I realized that they were just teaching me cryptography, tools. Everything was a tool, and I was thinking strategy and tactics and operations. And so I went out into industry, I worked for consulting firms, I trained with some military people, did a lot of counterterrorism work, and I came back to the university and I said, you know what, we're going to create a new research team. This team is going to solve real-world problems in cybersecurity, and we're not going to care what methodology or what theories or what approaches we use. Those approaches are going to be tailored to the problem and not the other way around. And so we built this team, and there was a couple of really interesting things about this team. We would only take on PhD students who fit particular criteria. You had to have 10 to 15 years of industry experience to apply. You had to teach the research leaders something we didn't know about security. You could not have an IT background. And you had to be in it for the long haul. So you would be our ambassadors, and we would really invest in you. And we teach you not just research methods and how to do research, but how to think strategically about the real world and its problems and the role that academics can play. So what is the problem that we're actually dealing with here? The problem we're dealing with here is how can organizations defend their information resources against the most advanced threat actors? And we chose that problem around 2012, 2014, when, I mean, I've been at the university for about 26 years, And some of my colleagues, like Sean, has been here for even longer, so we are part of the furniture, right? They say that we're going to be buried inside the university somewhere, secret, hopefully. But anyway, so we have been there for a very, very long time, and we got disillusioned with the industry because we started studying organizations and how they did cybersecurity, and we saw a lot of organizations that did it poorly. And then around 2012, 2014, we said, you know what? We're going to take the burning industry question, which is, how does private enterprise survive a nation-state attack? So if you've got a nation-state threat actor like a country with all of its cyber armies, and they go after a private organization because they want to steal their IP, or because they want to bring down a critical infrastructure service that they're running, or for whatever reason they want to steal their information, how does a private enterprise actually survive such an attack? Especially given the cyber professionals in that organization are likely to not have experienced anything like this and are likely to be not equipped and not trained to be able to deal with something of this magnitude and this sophistication. So our role as academics would be to try to level the playing field. How do we build research-informed, evidence-based models to teach executives how to make decisions in crises so that they can survive these attacks? That's our whole purpose, or our reason for being. So that's the problem that we started with, but there were all these underlying challenges that kind of played a big role. Here are some questions that we asked ourselves. We were actually in a small department in the Faculty of Science before we got pushed into a different department merger. You know, it happens inside organizations like universities. And we were sort of merged with computer science and software engineering, something we were not familiar with. And at that point in time, we started asking ourselves a lot of questions. Question one, how can we study cyber practice in organizations if they don't give us access, right? Because it's so sensitive. Number two, where do we get funding for this kind of research when the Australian Research Council, which is like the one and only or major funding body, they don't fund innovative, creative, risky research. They fund traditional research, okay? Question number three, when we do all of this messy research, which is qualitative, case study based, where are we going to publish this? Because most IS journals, at least in those days, didn't really find this to be the kind of research they wanted to promote. And I've got stories and stories with some of the basket of 8 if you're interested. How can we transform industry practice when industry leaders don't respect academics? Not saying that there isn't reason behind that sentiment, but there are some academics who are industry researchers. That's all they do. And they have a role to play, and it's hard to play that role if industry says, oh, you're an academic, you live in Ivory Tower. You've got nothing to tell me because you're so theoretical and I'm practical, right? And how do we demonstrate our strategic value to our own university when they are focused on life-saving research, medical research, all those cancer centers around the University of Melbourne? How are you going to get in front of the Vice Chancellor and say, hey, we're really important too? What's IS, right? Information systems, there's not a whole lot of awareness of what that even is in this university, right? So how do we demonstrate our strategic value, and how can we compete against world-class research teams and researchers who are in these departments that we're in? For example, have a look at this guy, right? Rajkumar Boya, one of our stars. Have a look at his citations. 155,000 citations and an H-index of 170, right? That means he's published 170 papers with at least 170 citations per paper and more, right? So how do you compete with people in a department who have that kind of record when there's maybe nobody in your discipline who has that kind of record? So what's your value proposition? Those are some of the questions that we were sort of thinking about. And this is what we came up with as a way that our research team would actually compete, right? And one big point here is that we work as a team. We don't work as individuals. Our PhD students, we have about 15 PhD students at the moment, they're all very much selected for their individual expertise, what they bring to the team, and they all sort of work together to build our vision as to what we want to do as a research team. And the leaders of the team, that's myself and Sean, we are recipients of that knowledge, and that knowledge allows us to compete with some of the other academics who don't have teams that kind of work in an integrated way. So we work as one holistic unit. We make decisions as a team, we have a vision as a team, and we execute as a team. So let me explain this diagram to you. It's got 3 pillars: industry, research, and teaching. And the whole purpose of these 3 is to break those silos, is to say that because we're industry researchers, we want to bring all 3 of these stakeholders together. Everything starts with point number 1. We get invited into an organization to do a case study. And that means that we will start interviewing people inside that organization who engage, for example, in crisis response. And we'll ask them questions like, can you describe what you did from the time that you detected this incident to the time that you resolved it? Just tell us what you did. And we ask separately all of the key people who are involved in it, and then we piece together what actually happened in the organization. And from that empirical data, we will actually come to point 3, we'll publish research frameworks using various theories. Our favorite theories are organizational learning and situation awareness. And then from that empirical evidence, we'll write a teaching case. And that teaching case is designed to immerse our students who are in our undergraduates, postgraduates, executive cohorts, to immerse them in the real-world environment so that they can derive a whole range of lessons about what is going on there in industry and to dig a little bit deeper and identify the root causes why industry behaves the way it does. And then from those teaching cases, we make films. And I think this is one of the first times that the faculty began to take notice of us. Oh, everybody's world-class here, they used to say. But then when we won the London International Film Festival Award for Best Original Screenplay for our film about crisis, the deputy dean actually took notice of that and gave us the award for engagement in teaching, and then a conversation started at the faculty level as to who we are and what we do. And that was one of the ways, so strategic messaging internally within our university was one of the ways that we began to fight our way to recognition. 5A, so after we do in addition to doing all of these things, we also transform practice. And what does that mean? That means executive training. We train a lot of industry executives, but also our PhD students who are industry leaders go back into industry and become our biggest ambassadors. On the left-hand side here, in that blue box, is basically the makings of our opportunity. We invest very heavily in our undergraduate students, in our postgraduate students, in our executive students, because when they go back into industry, they open the doors for us and they allow us to do those case studies. So there's a bit of a virtuous cycle. The students become leaders, the leaders open the doors, we collect the empirical data results in research publications, and in teaching cases, the teaching cases go back to the students learn even more, and away we go. If you're interested in some of our work, we typically publish in the journal Computers and Security. And the reason why is because it is a multidisciplinary journal which is less finicky about the details of qualitative case study practice and more interested in the actual outcomes of what we're doing. So now I come to the part about building cybersecurity capabilities. If you're interested, I'm going to quickly present a format which helps academics think about industry problems. First of all, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Malaysia's cyber defense capability. What research has been done to try to actually address this problem previously? Not necessarily the most obvious areas of research, but any research that could shed any light on it. What theoretical framing, what lens are you going to use to study? Where are you going to get your vocabulary? How are you going to interpret the empirical evidence? How are you going to maintain that your definition of the words that you're using are going to be the definitions that you end with, are not going to be affected by the people who you're studying and their definitions of what you're talking about? What methodology are you going to use? For us, it's typically case study methodology, but for this particular study, which is how to build Malaysia's defense capability, we actually chose 3 different organizations of 3 different levels of capability: high, medium, and low. And if you're interested in how we determined which one was high, medium, low, happy to have a chat after this. The key thing is, we knew that if we could get 3 organizations at the right levels of maturity, then a comparison between the 3 using the theory would help us to figure out which differences would have discriminatory power and allow us to make a rigorous maturity assessment on a range of organizations. So that's the research question, right? So we said, how can cybersecurity situation awareness capability be measured? We did our research, and we came up with a number of contributions. We built a maturity model. We validated it. We did it on 3 to 5 organizations. That's the empirical data. We validated it across 16 organizations and their industry leaders. We presented that to the Malaysian government to help them to predict which critical infrastructure services would survive a nation-based attack and which ones needed help. And from that came a lot of executive training, and we set up our own consulting firm, and we, opportunities to do audit and uplift. And then for A, which is the literature, a socio-technical framework for measuring situation awareness across organizations. And lastly, all sorts of theory-related contributions, for example, extending Ensley situation awareness to incident response. There were a lot of contributions. Happy to talk about that after this. Okay, I'm going to ask the people at the back to play this video diary. It's going to give you a feeling of what happened in Malaysia after we did our project. Please play the video.
Today marks the end of a 2-year journey, a collaboration between the University of Melbourne and University Kebangsaan Malaysia, 2 research universities coming together to solve a critical question facing Malaysia and most of the countries in the world today, which is how do you improve or build your cyber response capability against critical cyber attacks? We collected a considerable amount of empirical data around how Malaysian critical infrastructures, predominantly in banking and telecommunications, how they behaved when they're under cyber attack. From that evidence, we built a maturity model, which we then tested against the Malaysian government, against Malaysian industry, and against Malaysian academics. And that rigorous testing, combined with the output, which was this maturity model, really gave us like an important artifact around which we could build a significant contribution to Malaysia.
So I think this maturity model that's been developed by University of Melbourne with UKM really presents something that corporations like myself are keen to explore. Simply because we've seen a few things, some concepts in the maturity model that are appealing. For example, there is this idea about the use of situational awareness, right? And this idea of taking something from the military sort of environment appeals because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is like a war, right? Being able to have a good situational awareness, having the right intelligence, knowing what is going on, at the end of the day is absolutely critical for organizations because you need to know what you're up against, right? You have to measure it, and you have to be able to determine where it is in order to be able to fight against it and defend against it. So I think what we are really counting on this model is to not just focus on compliance, which models have tended to be, but really look at defense and something a bit more practicable, right? Which is what organizations typically are looking for in this situation.
The model that was proposed by the team was interesting because, again, it focused on strategic thinking, decision-making, and how you deal with threat intelligence on an organization scale, and even extending that to the national level. Now, using that as a reference model is very important for organizations because at the core, it's about decision-making.
We believe that this maturity model will be one of the tools available for the industry to use as fit to their environment in measuring where they are, what are their gaps, and where should they prepare for in terms of raising their cybersecurity baseline?
I think it's something that is very important for UKM to have a strong partnership with a very reputable university like University of Melbourne, and in a way this will enhance our research progress and research activities, especially towards something that is very important to the country as well, such as cybersecurity. So we hope we can in a way continue the collaboration and expand it to other discipline and other fields.
I think university has to look into that cybersecurity is just not on science technology aspect. Every other disciplines must have certain cybersecurity element in it, number one. Number two, research shall not just on technical cybersecurity research. There are, I think, one of it on the elements of social engineering. There's also cybersecurity elements with that as well. So I think universities, I mean, this effort initiative by UKM and UC Melbourne is one of the initiatives that is it's kind of out of the box approach research study, which many feels that it is not a priority, but in actual fact, the maturity model that you're producing is one of the priority. Every single day that I do, I will say, how do we gonna support this in terms of our talents?
It's the it's the relationships that we built with the university, the sustainability of it, and the fact that we transferred our knowledge and our methods to University Kebangsaan Malaysia. And that was one of the major objectives as set by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, our major funding partner, is that we were here for the long run in order to pass this capability on so that the local universities would be able to continue this project. And I think we were successful in doing that.
Okay, so I'm out of time, so I'm just going to wrap up with one final minute. Just go over the major lessons that we learned because it's going to feed into the panel that's going to happen after the break. There's 4 things that we learned. One is we thought that this was going to be easy going into Malaysia, getting all the permissions from the governments and the universities in check, but actually we realized that a foreign entity coming into a developing country, you are looked at as an imperial, influence. And so the pushback against us coming from Australia was something we were not prepared for. And we realized that our strategy was going to be eaten up by the culture. So there's a very famous saying in IS, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that's what happened. We didn't understand the culture enough in the nation to be able to get all the partnerships going. So that was one big lesson. The second is that industry, academics, and governments work on different timelines. So working within those timelines was really, really challenging for us. And they're competing priorities. So yes, the government wanted us to do this. Yes, industry thought this was really interesting, but you're competing against all these other things. And then the third is the narrative matters. The detail of the maturity model, nobody in our stakeholder landscape really will come across. So it's about the stories that we tell about our research and not the research itself that matters. And lastly, it's about sustainable impact. Our biggest priority from the Australian government point of view was, you're not only going to be here for 2 years, you've got to transfer your knowledge to the local university. And so we spent a lot of time training the researchers on how to do the kind of research that we do. And that was very, very empowering. We just heard that that team of researchers that we trained are now going to be asked to present in front of the Prime Minister of Malaysia what they have been doing. And that is very, very heartening for us and very rewarding. And that's where I'll leave it. I don't think we have time for questions, but there will be a panel, so plenty of time for questions there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed, for your insightful presentation. Could you please just stay on stage for the Q&A session? If the audience has any question, please just raise your hand, and Professor Ahmed will take your question.
Okay, sure. If you got time. Yeah.
All right. First of all, I loved your presentation. I thought the work you are doing is absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Now, you're doing this work in Malaysia. How transferable are some of the things you're doing to other countries that maybe have different cultural environments, government regulation, and so forth? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we chose Malaysia is because Malaysia has the highest power distance index in the world. So power distance index is a measure of how much power a supervisor has over their subordinate, right? Australia has one of the lowest power distance indexes in the world, which means that the power differential between supervisors and subordinates is a lot less. Malaysia was a really great example of how organizations in crises can't seem to overcome their rigid hierarchical structures. So we thought that Malaysia would be a really good choice to start with, and then a lot of other countries that also similarly have very rigid hierarchies are going to be sort of easier to approach. So from a culture point of view, and there's a difference between national culture and org culture, from an org culture point of view, we were pretty happy with our choices, and I think that a lot of what we have found is transferable, but I'm really interested in, especially as you saw in that video, we had Petronas, equivalent of Aramco. They were part of this project. So I'm really interested in getting access to Aramco and seeing whether Aramco's cyber response capability as an enterprise-wide level is also something we can compare with. That would really help our maturity model. But yes, thank you. There was a question right 2 rows behind.
So you mentioned that in Malaysia, exceptionally did good, and mashallah for that. Were there any other factors that made it or affected dealing with the company itself or dealing with the executives?
Yeah. One of the key factors was regulation. The banking environment, which is where we specialize in, is heavily regulated by the Central Bank of Malaysia. The Central Bank of Malaysia actually imposed an org structure on the banks. So when we were starting to do our case studies, we realized, oh, why is the Chief Information Security Officer always reporting to the Chief Risk Officer? And the IT is actually reporting to a different line. That doesn't make any sense. And then when we started to probe a bit, we found out that actually is imposed by the central bank. And that caused a lot of, consternation amongst us. Because if you can imagine an organization that doesn't grow into its structure and has a structure imposed on it, ends up trying to work around the structure, and that's what we saw, right? We saw organizations working around structures that were imposed on them, and now you can imagine in a crisis how that organization is going to behave, right? So org structure was a very key one, coming from regulation. Another key one was the cost economics. So in Australia, you can see a pyramid structure where all the senior executives have been around for 10, 15, 20 years. They're paid really well. But at the bottom, you're paid McDonald's rates, right? At the really bottom. Whereas in Malaysia, labor is really cheaper, right? And because it's cheaper, they can retain their expertise for a lot longer, right, than Australian organizations can. So you have higher levels of expertise in the middle management, and you don't see that so much in Australia. So I think there's a lot to learn there. And then finally, I think one of the things that we really loved about Malaysia is social cohesion, is that there is, in their DNA, there's tolerance and cohesion and less friction amongst races, which in an organization where you've got people from different races and different ethnic backgrounds, it was really interesting to see how they were behaving compared to how Australian organizations behave around that, right? Okay, I'll leave it there.
Hello, yes. Thank you, Dr. Atif. It's been an impressive journey, and thank you for taking us through it. So you said something about training other researchers, the Malaysian researcher, to do work the same way that you do it in Australia. So I guess that you came up with a certain framework to do that, and if so, can you copy that to other contexts or to other future research projects? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. How we did it was we brought the Malaysian researchers on the journey, so they were there in every interview from the very beginning to the very end. And it was a bit tactical in our point of view because we knew that we didn't want the Malaysian organizations to actually push back against us. And I remember when we started this project, my mentor, Professor Richard Baskerville, said to me, Atif, you're going to go into Malaysia, you have to really be careful about how you collect that data, where that data ends up, and you have to assure them that their national sovereignty is going to be respected, right? You may think that you're going in and you're doing them a favor. They may not see it that way. You have to help them to be comfortable with you. So given Richard's advice, we brought the Malaysians in on it on every interview, and we let them frequently take the lead so that their people were speaking to their people, and we were sort of sitting a little bit in the background, trying not to. And so using that sort of, that journey, the Malaysians were with us all the way, and that gave them a lot of confidence. When they started to interview, they started to ask questions, and because when you take an academic and you put them in front of a really senior executive, they can lose their cool, their confidence. So that was one of the things that we had to do, is not just to ask, and I remember the very first interview, I started asking questions of the executives. The Malaysian academics were really worried. They're like, you're really interrogating him. You've got to be nice and polite. We can't do this in this culture. And I was like, no, we're going full on, right? And by the end, they were doing that as well, really asking questions. So yeah, I think we passed a bit of the Australian culture along inadvertently. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Professor Ahmed, for your wise words and for the last question there. We're going to go for a 30-minute break before continuing with the last session for the day, which is a panel discussion and an exciting one happening right after the break. Thank you so much. welcome back all, and thank you for your time and patience throughout the day. I'm confident that this panel discussion will shed light on valuable insights and spark stimulating conversations amongst you. This panel discussion on building a resilient cybersecurity future will discuss a range of valuable topics, including industry-academia cooperation, policy and strategies, and also regional cooperation. Please welcome our moderator for this panel discussion, Professor Sean Maynard, and his panelists.
So welcome to this panel. As we were discussing on the stage before, this is actually an Australian panel because everybody has either lived in Australia or studied in Australia. So as a result, we're going to be very Australian and we'll just keep it nice and cool and relaxed. Okay. So I'm Sean Maynard. As you can tell from the slide pack and from Atif's comments, we're from the University of Melbourne. 4 of us on the panel. The other 2, not so good. Sorry. But we'll get started. So this panel is all about looking at essentially how do you build resilience and cybersecurity across, regions? How do you build capacity for, non-first world countries in cybersecurity so that they're safe? Okay, and we've got a whole pile of questions. I think there's 14 questions for the panel, and that will hopefully leave us with some time, if these guys don't talk too much, to have some questions from the audience as well, just to completely confuse them later on today. So the panel's purpose, the critical aspects of capacity building, so how do you build capacity? How do you collaborate between industry, academia, government, society? How do you impact policy and strategy? And also, what are the future challenges that we have in this area? So we had some we've had 2 keynotes today which showed something similar to this particular slide. And it's all about how does industry, academia, government, society all interact together. Okay, Supra had one that was very similar that he called his messy slide. Atif went through a variation of this one. He didn't give me the new slide, of course. I have to use the old slide. A variation of this slide. But it's all about how do you really, as an academic, how do you build a career, but also how do you give back? How do you actually make what you do worthwhile in the wider world? Okay, and that's all I want to say about that. Let's introduce the panel, and I will be very Australian and go through and introduce by first name. So immediately my left is Scott Ainsley. I messed it up already. So Scott is Managing Director of a cyber security consulting company. He's also a PhD student. Next to him here is Hussein. So Hussein works in a cybersecurity SME as a researcher. Next to Hussein is Arwa, who is a data and cybersecurity executive leader. Next to her is Mohammed. No. What's your name? Munir. Oh, sorry, Munir is my ex-PhD student, so I'm just stirring.
You're speaking of me.
Who's a management consultant. Essentially, these days, he used to be an academic. And at the end, you've already met Atif, who is my co-partner in crime for the last 26 years. So that's our panel. And we're going to start asking questions around those topics that you just saw. So our first topic here is about capacity building and development. Okay, and Munir's kindly put his hand up to answer the first question, which is, how can developing nations accelerate their cybersecurity maturity without having to go through all of that evolutionary stages that other countries in the first world have done? So Munir.
Thank you so much, Sean. I'd like first to thank the organizer for a fantastic event. We had really enjoyed the first day and the end of this day, and hopefully tomorrow, inshallah. I'm honored also to be sharing the stage with my esteemed colleagues and also my supervisor. They gave me a very hard time at my PhD, and this is the result of it. I was telling them I have the post-PhD syndrome, which is a fear of my supervisor, even if I finished. Back to the questions, I'd like to shed the light about the cybersecurity landscape in Saudi Arabia. Before 2017, the effort for cybersecurity was fragmented. There was a single authority that responsible for all cybersecurity matter. The cybersecurity, as you know, it's a national security issue, protecting national infrastructure. Everything is depending on cybersecurity. So after the catastrophic event that happened to Aramco and some government agencies in Saudi Arabia, there was a decision to establish a single authority which called the National Cybersecurity Authority, NCA. NCA is responsible for setting strategic direction, building the national capabilities, and also collaborating and building collaborative work with the industry. So back to the questions, I think there is no shortcut for the cybersecurity. Saudi Arabia went from zero regulation to highly regulated cybersecurity domain. We have 6 or 7 frameworks that organizations are mandated to implement. There is a regular audit for the organization, and organizations that don't comply, there will be a corrective action and following with them to comply with this regulation, especially the essential cybersecurity regulation. So this has created a very compliance mindset where people are worried about compliance, worried about ticking the boxes without even going further and understanding how effective these controls has been implemented. Usually you start with compliance, then you move to risk, and then maturity. And as the organization implement those controls, as they learn from their mistakes, then they move to risk and address the risk that associated with compliance and implementing the controls, and also going to mature into having more automated and more optimized processes. So I've seen in Australia there have been so many focus on compliance that they have moved to more risk culture and more maturity. And I think we could learn from their experience there into more, implementing cybersecurity in a more comprehensive and more holistic manner, focusing not just only in the compliance, in risk and maturity as well.
So thank you. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, so thank you. That was a great journey for Saudi Arabia. I would just like to add, you just said before 2017. If you look at the ranking of the kingdom in 2017 in the Global Cybersecurity Index that is measured by the ITU, it was 46 worldwide. And today, by 2022, we became first. And it was gradual. It didn't come all together. And that's through, first of all, having commitment, I think, from the country itself, and that was shown by the Vision 2030. And then establishing the National Cybersecurity Authority, there was the Saudi Arabia Federation for Cybersecurity Programming and Drones, that was for building capability and capacity building for talents, doing hackathons, and bringing the young people into the field. And then also there was SaudiCIS, the establishment of SaudiCIS, which is the Saudi Arabia AI and Data Authority. And that also looked at the privacy that complemented the security of things. And then looking at NCA's journey, it wasn't like, okay, it's established and then everything went fine. So we looked at, I think NCA had a great journey at looking at, I remember when they came up with the essential cybersecurity controls. That was the first framework that came out. And at that time, the compliance wasn't mandatory. So it was trying to give us some years to, as someone from the private sector, I took time for us to understand it, to challenge it. And this is where we need to also collaborate between academic regulators and the private sector in order to challenge these frameworks that are there. So it came out and people started complying with it, and now it started to become mandatory. After the essential, it came the cybersecurity critical controls. And this is, it took us to the next level. These controls are intended for sensitive or critical infrastructure, national critical infrastructure entities. Like, for example, we're talking about telecom, we're talking about banking, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about government entities, and so on. So this was the frameworks. And then they started, of course, the frameworks are there. We need talent in order to comply with them. And then, as they said, compliance mindset, and maybe we had a great discussion with Atif, and Munir talked about it. It's not the right thing, but it's a good start, because the compliance is based on international best standards like NIST, like ISO 27001, and it gives you a starting point. And then you start looking at, is this something applicable for me or not? So then you have to have the talent for it, and then you go to the next level. So you looked at the critical infrastructure, and then you start looking at awareness for the public and looking at the collaboration between the public and private. So if we can see National Cybersecurity Authority and the other organizations came up with Cyber Pro programs, other programs that the private sector were part of it. It was the best institutes of capability building. And also they started collaborating. The final thing now, they went to the research and innovation. So how we can localize our solutions, because we started by complying, bringing solutions, but to look at the real risk, sometimes this is where compliance is not enough. We need to localize these solutions. We need to build the market in order to make sure that we have local solutions. And local doesn't mean only within the country. It could be also helping other countries in order to localize it in the region. So accelerators were coming up. We can see lots of researchers collaborating with these regulator environments, regulator entities, and also the private sector starting to look at what our problems, how you as educational or academia can help us into fulfilling these needs, and how the regulation. So I think it's a triad of regulators, academia, and private sector.
That's probably a great lead into the next question, actually. The next question is, what role should universities play in developing cybersecurity capabilities on a national level? Any volunteers?
So, universities actually can add a lot in this journey. There are some cases where we were involved, actually, Arwa and I, as advisory board members in setting curriculum for cybersecurity major for some universities. There are a lot of cases when we interview fresh graduates, we see them coming with theory, principles only, where we stepped into curriculum programs and we suggested for some courses in the cybersecurity domain that we would like to see those graduates having, such as, for example, knowing a little bit about governance, risk, and compliance in terms of cybersecurity, threat intelligence, and how the security operation centers work, and knowing about the difference between risks and threats, because when they come with only principles, it requires us for a very long time to train them, and this sometimes become a challenge when it comes to budgeting for trainings. So universities can first request some help from industry experts to jump in and recommend for such enhancement for the curriculum. Second, they can also partner with industry environments and companies to train their fresh graduates before they make it to graduation for internships. And also they can bridge and prepare the students to graduate, bridge their graduation with some professional certifications in the field. This will help those fresh graduates obtain or find opportunities and be prepared in terms of job selection.
If you can add to what Hussein has mentioned, NCA has, in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, they have developed the Saudi Cybersecurity Higher Education Framework, which is focusing on assessing and developing cybersecurity program and training courses that align with the national needs and align with specific skills and competencies that should be in bachelor, or master degree or diploma degree. So NCA, overseeing the development and the updating for this framework, they monitor and analyze the higher education and how they comply and monitor that in a very, not compliance manner, rather in a more regular basis of alignment and collaboration. Also, they evaluate the alignment, they update the cybersecurity program to align the Cyber Saudi, to align program with the Cyber Saudi higher education framework.
Latif, do you want to add anything to that?
I worry a lot about how universities have not evolved to meet a lot of the challenges that the modern era, poses to it. What's the role of universities? Why do universities exist? Originally, the idea here was that universities are there just to uplift the skill base of a nation. Without universities, nations have a labor force that can't be upskilled and can't therefore provide value or greater value to the nation without those universities. But universities are also research institutions, and they play this dual role. They're not here to provide job-ready graduates. They're here to provide lifelong skills. They're here to help people to think strategically across their entire life. And for some reason, we have this life cycle where people go to high school, they go to university, and then they go into the workforce, and then they never come back to university. And that's really strange, because that's not what universities were made for. They're supposed to be there for always giving you those life skills. You should always be going back to university. And so I'll give you one example that I would say challenges the narrative. Look at the medical industry. When you turn up to a hospital as a patient and you've got symptoms that the nurse who's diagnosing you has never seen, she or he will run through the playbook and say, oh, I've never seen these symptoms. And they'll call in an expert doctor who will then look at you, put you in an emergency room, and then start talking to their colleagues. But sooner or later, they'll hit a database, and then they'll start to query, has anybody seen a patient in the world with these symptoms? And if they did, what did they do? And what can we learn from them so we can try it on this patient? Right? Now look at what goes on in the cybersecurity world. Right? An attack happens on a company. The cybersecurity expert sees the attack, and they try to diagnose it. If they've never seen it before, they have nowhere to go. They're not research trained, right? They don't know how to preserve what has happened and put it in a shared knowledge base so other cybersecurity people around the world can learn from their experiences. Right? It's an entirely different world. Think about antivirus software. Right? What kind of rigor has gone behind developing vaccinations for attacks on organizations? It's not the same. If you could imagine, like when the COVID happened, if you imagine that only expert opinion, people like doctors got together and made up some vaccine and gave it to you, you'd be horrified. But that's what's happening in cyber all the time now. We don't have rigor like we do in the medical industry. We don't have clinical trained cyber people who know how to preserve the evidence and to behave like doctors, right? I'm talking generally. Of course, we have
people like Munir here who have that ability. But there is no culture to create that, and I think that this is the fault of the university, right? The universities have not changed this narrative in IT, whereas in the medical side, they have done it. And we're not learning from medicine.
Yeah, I think I would agree to some point, but coming from the private sector, I do, especially in very mature organizations, and I think here in Saudi Arabia, my experience, and also in other countries that I've done knowledge experience, we do have a place. There's threat intelligence now. And once you have a threat or you have an attack and you haven't seen the symptom, you have somewhere to go to, which is the National Cybersecurity Authority, where you report it, and then they go back and they see if there's other similar attacks. So there's signatures that they look at or same symptoms, and then they look at it, even they see if someone else has been attacked. If then it's not been seen here in Saudi Arabia, the National Cybersecurity Authority has created a council meeting that is the GCC. So now there's a threat intelligence platform sharing that they do with the GCC, and they look at it there. And if it's not there, then they have the world. So there's lots of solutions that are there, like recorded future, and that they bring threat intelligence from different companies in the private sector. So I would say there are some things, but still, collaboration needs to be mature more and needs to go to a second level of that.
Okay, I want to pass to Scott to have a comment about that as well, I think.
Thank you. I'm not going to disagree. I think from my perspective, and I've been in academia for about 2.8 years, so I'm just a baby, but I've been in industry for 30, and I've been in the IT industry for a bit longer. Now I'm starting to understand, as I'm undergoing my PhD journey, and it's the fault of Atif and Sean, who have opened my eyes to what academia and academics offer. I come from a world where academics are not discussed. You don't talk to them. They're not of interest because we're operational, we're pragmatists, we're interested in making money. Academics are annoying. But when I started the PhD journey, what I started to discover through the people I was talking to and the papers I was writing reaffirmed in my mind that the only place where you're actually going to get true research that is objective and specifically designed so under a set of rules that have got nothing to do with cyber, very little to do with politics, hopefully, although universities have politics. But it's a great place where if you need objective research done to come up with an answer you might not like, but they'll come up with an answer nonetheless, because you know they follow a process, and that process is well-defined. The people are highly talented in deriving that answer, and so it all complements the system. I've worked in government, and I've worked in private. I own my own company, and I've worked with what we call an ISAC. I've not worked in academia until now. So this is a fresh perspective for me, and I look at it with fresh eyes. And I find it really quite exciting because I've not seen this capability available in the private sector, and it doesn't exist in the government sector.
Okay, I think we'll move on. We've already used 25 minutes of our time on the first two questions. So I want to show the next three questions all at once. And some of these are sort of been covered a little bit. And these three questions are, how can we better bridge the gap between academic cybersecurity research and industry needs? What are the key barriers for knowledge transfer? And how do we ensure that academic research in cybersecurity remains relevant while maintaining rigour? Any takers?
So let's go one step back and understand the landscape of cybersecurity. Sometimes from practical point of view, it's a new field that we cannot find all the tools and solutions that can protect our organizations off the shelf. So especially working for NEOM as first cognitive ecosystem in the world, we have customized technologies that haven't seen the light anywhere else in the world. So in order for us to protect such innovative environment, we will need and require such unique and customized security. How are we going to build those kind of capabilities? We'll have to come back to academia, because we cannot afford testing new tools and solutions into our real-world environments. That will stop business continuity. The university and academia can offer this type of environments for testing and can bring success to those kind of proposed problem-oriented proposals. I'm sure.
Yeah, I can add to that. For example, when you look at the universities, you see that there's, or they call it innovation, there's a box of risk and reward. So when it's high risk and high reward, then it's green innovation. When it's low risk, low reward, sorry, it was blue innovation. When it's low risk, low reward, it's red innovation. And then there's the white innovation where there's high risk in it and very low reward. And this is where a lot of the academia is working on. And to be honest, why it's low reward? Because you come up with new innovation, but no one knows how to apply it. And this is where, after 10 years, maybe this white innovation will be the most popular innovation ever. And then you have the gold, which is low risk and then high reward. And this is jackpot. I think everyone wants to go there, but it's very niche market and mostly monopolized. So what I'm saying here, we need to balance in the university between what is the research that's going to be white innovation and which ones will be gold, which ones will be red, and which one will be blue. So this is one of the things that I think academia needs to work on. And it goes back to collaborating with, if it's applied, you need to collaborate, what is the problem, and collaborate with the private sector in doing that.
There is a new trend that I have seen in the recent years in university, which is establishing advisory board from the industry, being involved, collaborating, participating in reviewing program, delivering talks, being a guest lecturers at the university, which is really trying to bridge the gap between how the industry thinks and what the academia is all about. So I hope university continues in this trends and capitalize on the industry mindset that involve in some of those advisory committees.
Yeah, actually, Munir, I think this is a great point, and it shows the trend. So for the last 3 years, I've been approached as from the private sector from many universities, King Khalid University, King Abdulaziz University, and Prince Sultan University. I'm an advisory board on all three. What's very interesting is the discussions 3 years ago and the discussions today. I can see the strategies that they are building on how to raise the university, how they're trying really to get the feedback from us, the private sector. And on the same advisory board, I see government entities. And that was so interesting because also the government entities has the strategy to show them where to go. I think the strategies now are built very well. And now we're looking for the execution, which is the most challenging thing to do.
I'd like to add something over here. As Dr. Munir mentioned earlier, and thanks to the National Cybersecurity Authority for setting that education framework that most universities are trying to follow. So they unified the language and what they are trying to achieve at the end of the road. And it's a beautiful action.
So a couple of maybe challenging thoughts here. I'm a real fan of reimagining the role of the university. I think from a management practice point of view, researchers are like mirrors to the industry. When a researcher comes into the industry with no ulterior objective except to study what is going on and to mirror back to them what they're seeing, we see the fragmentation that we see in organizations, for instance. A very well-known one is business and IT, like business and IT disconnect. There's a lot of research coming out of MIT Sloan School of Management that says business and IT do not know how to talk to each other. And it's not the fact that they can't get into a room with each other, it's just that they actually see the world through an entirely different lens. And that problem, too, is possibly caused by the fact that IT people come out of engineering schools and business people come out of business schools. And there's very little multidisciplinary education that overcomes this hurdle. So the role that researchers play then is going into organizations and then mirroring back to them some of the issues that they're having, and also allowing them to learn from other organizations. And I'll give you just one example. When researchers first went to Lego, everybody knows Lego, the toy company, it was possibly unheard of that you could create that much precision at that scale, at that price. And until a researcher went in and told the world about what that organization was doing, other organizations would simply not know. So what is the role of a researcher here? In many ways, we find those organizations that have done something remarkable, and we teach other organizations how to behave the same way, right? That's something that organizations cannot do on their own, right? Organizations do not share knowledge like that. And it's the role of practice researchers to create that cross-pollination. And that's another thing that we don't see universities doing enough of, right? So I would, again, encourage this reimagination of the role of a university so that the lines between industry and university are blurred, and the deep knowledge that universities have become more practically relevant, and industry actually begins to see the universities as an asset and as an advantage, rather than simply a pipeline of talent.
I love what you said, Atif, and I think we need more use cases in the industry. We need in the private sector to open our doors, open our books, open our data for these researchers. But I would also look at it the other way around. So sometimes when I have a problem, maybe threat intelligence, it's very well collaborated. But when I have a problem and I want to build a culture program, and I remember our first interaction with Dr. Munir was about that. When I go and look for papers, it's all closed. It's all in paid journals, which I think most private sector will not pay for it. So I think there's barriers two ways. There's private sector not opening up doors for these researchers to put in, but also the private sector cannot access whatever the researchers are doing. So I think this is a very important point that needs to be addressed.
I agree.
There is a philosophy behind it.
Okay, let's move on to the next set of questions. It's about policy and strategy. Okay, I'll show all three again because it will save some time, hopefully. What should be the priority areas for national cybersecurity capacity building programs? How can governments better support collaboration between academia and industry? And what lessons can we learn from successful national cybersecurity programs in other countries? So feel free to answer.
If I may, I'm developing strategies for a large organization and a ministry entity and a very high sensitive entities within the organization as part of SaudiCIS, because SaudiCIS is the Saudi Information Technology Company, which is the operational arm of NCA. And one of the main challenges that we face is, or organization actually faces, that they come to us asking about AI and how can we incorporate AI in their strategy. And this has two aspects. One aspect is security of AI, because cybersecurity are receiving a lot of requests to do risk assessment on how AI is going to be used in a more secure and safe manner. But they don't have the capacity, they don't have the expertise to assess those applications, so they perceived as a showstopper. They block everything with these websites and applications for AI because they don't have the capacity to really identify the risk and mitigate those risks associated with using of AI. The other thing is how AI can enable them to identify risk and enable them to automate their processes in terms of monitoring, analysis of the so many logs that they receive from different systems. So it's one of the challenges that we need to focus our capability building on it in terms of identifying risk and how can we incorporate AI to the cybersecurity controls that we implement inside the organization.
Any other takers?
So, yeah, I'll have a shot at this. So the Australian example is not a good one. So I'll use that one. So effectively, you've got a government that wanted to implement policy. It wasn't directed at cyber, it was directed at security, and it was directed at a national strategy. So they implemented legislation to address their critical infrastructure, and they did it in a number of different stages. So when that legislation was introduced, industry had had a little bit of a warning of what was coming, but not a lot. And by the time it arrived, there was not a great deal of time for them to actually cope with or learn to understand what was now law. This is not a good approach, but it is an approach that a government will use if it wants to get re-elected. If you're in another country where that imperative is maybe not so important, then there'll be a different agenda and you may have different opportunities. So the key to it is understanding how can you manage the environment, because it's already been hinted at by my colleagues. Collaboration and trust. Trust is a magic word because you don't get it instantly and you can lose it instantly. So it's a bit of a thin edge. So you need to be very careful how you manage collaboration and earn that trust. In a university environment, here I am doing a PhD looking at threat intelligence. And the biggest difficulty I've found is the paucity of research that looks at practice methodology. I can find swathes of paper, hundreds and hundreds of papers that look at quantitative analysis of technical solutions in comparative assessments between 2 types of different, or 3 different, or 10 different types of technology platforms. To use an Australian expression, yeah, whoopee. That's not what I want. What I want to see is, if you take that technology and you place it in an organization, how the hell are they going to use it? What will it be used for? How do the people using it operate it when it doesn't work? And what if a vendor owns the technology? And one of the analysts says, how'd you get that answer? And the vendor replies, I am sorry, that is intellectual property. I can't tell you that. And then you then find yourself having to accept an answer for which you actually do not know how it was generated. You can't see, they do, but they're not going to share it because it's IP. So research papers, and I'll reinforce what Atif said, need research that's practical. I picked these 2 supervisors because they don't build what we refer to as shelfware. That is, you design books and papers that are used to block doors open so the air conditioning works, or it sits on a shelf in a cupboard. We need stuff that people can use and that reflects the operations in which they are practicing their craft. The trust comes back to it again, where if you ask to go in, and Atif talked about this, if you ask to go in and observe or examine a security operations center in a bank, they're generally going to tell you no, and they may not be so polite in that response. But if you can build on trust and get access, and Atif and Sean have done this over many years with some organizations, then you can get access to that data, and then you can start to build on the body of knowledge which you can then share and turn into practical outcomes. And in a policy world, policy takes time. And this reveals one of the dilemmas. All right? Industry is interested in quarter by quarter by quarter because that's what profits are driven by. A government will be interested in when's the next election, when's the next term, how long am I before my election comes up, and that will drive their focus. And they don't worry so much about money. Well, really not, but they do. As opposed to a private industry, no. And universities, where do they get their money? Either from government funding, and again, it's a problem. And so you have this schism in timelines which will drive different agendas, and we need to be very wary of that.
And that's actually what brings to the table in terms of collaboration. Organizations should start, at a national level, should start thinking to collaborate internationally. There are some global stages where they can contribute and collaborate with their knowledge and experience to develop this niche field. I'll give you an example. We collaborated with the World Economic Forum in shaping a framework to uplift the cybersecurity skills worldwide. And what the results out of this framework is that we had a publication of around like 35 pages where other nations can leverage and apply for free, and it is available in an open library. Also, similarly, we collaborated with the United Nations in a similar initiative to secure the future of AI. So those kind of global stages, they think of the future. So when I'm an active member of the United Nations of the high-level AI. When I first got into this group, I was like, what are these people talking about? They are talking about things that will happen or will take place 10 years from now, 5 years from now. So, and also another example is I collaborated with the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, which is part of the United Nations. We have over 100 countries attending. It's just amazing on how they want to set the policies or frameworks for the future. They talk about futuristic technologies in terms of securing those future technologies. Because all the organizations currently, they think of digitalizing all of their infrastructure. And I put it in this simple way. Every technology is connected to a digital component. And every technology that is connected to a digital component needs security. How simple is that? So if we don't secure, like currently we have nightmare of securing, for example, ChatGPT, which is available in most organizations, and we don't know where this information is going. And we cannot, as cybersecurity leaders in those organizations, we cannot shut it down. We cannot say, stop developing such innovative ways to help humanity because we don't have such frameworks to deal with. And there is a high-speed competition between developing AI and securing. So this is our role, is to collaborate in those international global stages to find a way of finding or setting the tone to secure and provide up-to-date security standards and policies that can cope up with the development of those kind of AI initiatives.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the future.
To the future?
To the future.
Back to the future.
Back to the future.
That's what we are doing here.
So future challenges. So first question here is, how will AI conference guys, and emerging technologies impact cybersecurity capacity building needs in developing countries?
I'd like to start with a story, an interesting story that happened to me a few months back. So I was traveling, and my data package was done, and I needed to renew it. So I thought to myself, I have the Wi-Fi in the hotel. I'll save some hours at night. In the morning, I'll send the code and renew my package with my operator. So I wake up, sleepy, and I sent the wrong code. The code disconnected my roaming. And when I got disconnected, I can't receive calls, I can't receive SMSs. So I tried to log into my application operator. I couldn't because it needed a two-factor authentication, which is an SMS. I tried to call, I can't do any calls. So luckily I was in the hotel, so I went to the WhatsApp group of my brothers and sisters and I told them, who's awake? It was like 7 a.m. And one of my brothers sent me a message. He's like, a private message. He's like, I'm awake. What do you need? I said, I'm in Dubai. Before I complete my sentence, he goes to the group. He's like, Arwa's WhatsApp is hacked. No one interact with her. Like, no, I'm not hacked. This is really me. And then he said, I sent a voice note. It's really me. And then he's like, even voice notes can be deep faked. How can I know? Call me a video call. And then I called him a video call, and finally he sees me, and then he jokingly started asking me some private questions no one knows except me, just to make sure that it's really me. So the story tells you how really AI is playing with the trust, how people are perceiving trust now. And there's lots of other incidents I heard from other colleagues where hackers also did AI on your voice and started sending voice notes on their behalf. So I was really telling him, you're knowledgeable about security or overcautious, but actually he did the right thing. So the thing is, AI is now giving us a wrong perception about trust. And how can we make sure that we change cybersecurity, change our strategies in order to do that? There was an interesting, looking at the World Economic Forum, you know, every year they come up with the global risk report. And cybersecurity and AI and misinformation were all on the top 5. They were 2 of the top risks were related to AI and cybersecurity. And also the interesting thing, they asked a question to executives, global leaders. They told them, do you think AI will be a better advantage to defenders or attackers? 1 in 10 said it will be an advantage for defenders. So this is how we are perceived as cybersecurity professionals or academics or government entities. I think there's less trust in us, and this is where we need to collaborate more in order to make sure that we use AI for our advantage. And starting with, first of all, as Dr. Munir said, we need to understand how AI is being built. When we get a project about AI, it takes us time in order to assess it or understand it. And also, after building the AI models, there needs to be transparency because, as the doctor said, we cannot look at saying this is IP. No, we need transparency in how the model is doing. Is it making the right decisions for us or not? So we need to look at it ethically as well. And then there's other things and privacy and so on. So I would say, just to make it short, I looked at many frameworks and there were the 3 T's and 4 T's, but I came up with the 6 T's. So looking at transparency, transformation, we need to transform our ways of securing things. We need to also look at tempo, so making sure that we stop in the right paces. COVID came, we accelerated in technology, but we went back and did hygiene to our security. And then there's togetherness, where we need to collaborate together, and so on.
Okay, thank you. Let's go on to the next question, because we are
Just
running
wanted to
short
add
of
one
time.
little
Okay, go on.
thing, especially in the cybersecurity domain. There is no Superman job over here. It is the field that needs I have seen it over here. I have seen it for a very long time. It is one of the fields that needs collaboration, and I have seen even big vendors. They don't compete only, but they all collaborate in integrating such secure system or ecosystem. So collaboration is highly needed over here, and it is a challenge because of trust. But we have seen it recently, and we hope with the launch of the Research and Development and Innovation Framework from the National Cybersecurity Authority, it does not target only national institutions, but also it brings even global institutes to collaborate together.
Okay, so our next question is a little bit about the skills of cybersecurity professionals. What do they look like in 10 years' time?
What skills?
Can you say that again?
So what skills will cybersecurity professionals need in the next 10 years or so?
So I think we covered most of it, like looking at the new trends and technologies. You need to really, cybersecurity experts need to know how these technologies are working. I think one other big area is regulations. I think every country is having different regulations related to data and how we share data between different countries. That's another thing that I'm suffering from now, and I think in 10 years we're going to suffer from it more and more. I think these are the main, let's say, trends that are coming. We need to be aware. And I think there's another thing to look at it. So I think cybersecurity needs to be a knowledge that everyone knows since they are in school. So it should be a topic for doctors, a topic for banking sector, financial sector, and all sectors. So I think it should be also democratized to all other professions.
So I think there is like a little list that I'm thinking of is AI and machine learning that will be highly demanded to be developed in the next 5 to 10 years. Post-quantum cryptography, for example. Cyber physical security, especially to smart and cognitive ecosystems, as Arwa mentioned, GRC and policy development.
I haven't come across a single university that teaches security science. The vast majority of cybersecurity people have no background in security. They're always taught security as an extension of technology, not the other way around. Security science is actually an entirely different discipline that is not actually taught. So the ability to think tactically is part of the military. In the military, they teach you that you can't risk manage your way out of a war, right? It's about leadership. It's about thinking in the heat of battle. It's about making decisions, right? It's about thinking tactically, operationally, strategically. And a lot of that security science, a lot of that security thinking is lost when it comes to cybersecurity because the focus is so heavily on technology. There's a number of reasons for that. But whatever those reasons are, and I think a lot of them are commercially driven, it's a perpetuation of this cycle where we keep pumping out more cybersecurity people that think it's a technology problem that can be solved with new technology. And there are very few people like Scott here who have a military background and who know what security looks like without technology in the picture, and then they understand the tool and its limitations and how to apply it in the right circumstances, right? So if you ask me, what are the skills that we need to have, is we need to take a bit of a 90-degree or maybe even a U-turn on cybersecurity and start teaching cybersecurity as a better balance between security science and the technology side of things, right? And I think 10 years from now, I think I'll quote somebody in ANZ Bank said this to me, the rate at which we adopt technology is faster than the rate at which we can protect ourselves from that technology, right? So we are adopting technology at a crazy rate, and we don't understand the technology that we're adopting, and we certainly don't know the implications from a security point of view, you know, of that technology on us. And just if I can broaden this from just cybersecurity to information security, and I say, if you just think about how much information is being generated every second of every day in an organization, how much information is coming into the organization, and how much information is leaving the organization on a daily basis. How many assets are being created every moment? Can you risk assess yourself at that speed? You simply cannot. You actually do not know what your assets are, and that's like the fundamental question of security. It's basically about knowing what your assets are and protecting them from the threats that they're exposed to. If you don't know what your assets are, how are you going to protect yourself, right? So this is a big question that we have around the generation of information assets and our inability to control our information environment around us.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving because we've only got about 6 minutes. And we've got about 25 minutes to go, sorry. So we'll move on to the regional context. Okay, so there's 3 questions here. I'll show all 3 again. Firstly, what unique challenges and opportunities exist in this region? How can regional cooperation enhance the cybersecurity capabilities across neighbouring countries? And what role can Saudi Arabia play in leading regional cybersecurity development? I'm going to pick on Munir straight away here.
Yep. In this day and age, our challenges, whether it's securing critical infrastructure or adopting new technology or merging a new technology, while mitigating the risk of this technology, I think it's not entirely unique from other challenges that other nations face. However, I think there is, as picking up from Atif's line, we need to think about cybersecurity in more holistic, comprehensive manner rather than looking at the cybersecurity from a very narrow technology. I've been interacting with so many CISO and GRC directors across the country, while as a compliance, NCA compliance officer, or as a consultant building strategy and operating models. And I see that the challenge is not of the technology, implementation of technology, or it's a budget problem. It's rather how security can be integrated in every part of the organization. And we have published, Sean and I and Atif, we have published how the inter-organizational security, liaison of security, and how security can be integrated in so many aspects of the organization. We see leaders inside the organization, they don't know how to interact with business, talk the same language, do the budgeting and recruiting the talent and developing those talent. They have been trained in a very specific way, implement technology going to solve the problem. While when they are trying to implement those regulations and controls, they are facing that these controls are, they are just the hub. These controls are related to HR, related to third-party risk assessment or third-party chain and supply chain. So they are, they don't have the ability or the capacity to understand the security from a broader perspective, so they can implement it in a very comprehensive way. So I think one of the main challenges that how can we retrain people and leaders in the industry to think strategically about cybersecurity, and how it's not just my organization, it's a national-wide security issue.
So I'll just add two challenges. The first one is the geopolitics around the cybersecurity in the region, and also coming from like 10 years of experience in working for oil and gas, we have a lot of legacy systems that developing security is a big challenge for us. And being targeted by sponsored sophisticated attacks enforces us to heavily invest in this domain in securing the IoT related devices to secure our production systems.
I might just bring up one point. I think Saudi Arabia has this competitive advantage over so much of the world in that it has a very strong ethical framework upon which it's been built. And we don't know what cyber leadership is just yet. Cyber leadership is a term that's being thrown around a lot, but there's no body of knowledge that defines what cyber leadership is. One of the things that's missing in cyber leadership is an ethical framework that allows leaders to make decisions based on ethics. So we saw in Malaysia, this was a huge issue. When we were interviewing some of the people who wrote their cybersecurity laws, we asked them, where did you get the ethics that underpin these laws? And they looked at us weirdly and said, oh, our personal ethics, our religion, Islam. And we asked, but there's Hindus and Chinese and Muslims as the three big communities. how confident are you that your ethics around, for example, the fact that you're surveilling the entire nation and you're collecting private information, how confident are you that your ethics align with their ethics? And is there an ethical framework that everybody in government is actually using when they come up with laws and regulations? And the answer was, of course, no. There is no ethical framework that everybody agrees on. It's personal ethics.
Exactly.
So we have this big gap here. There is no ethical framework in cyber leadership. And that's something that Saudi Arabia could be the first to do, right? Because Islam comes, and leadership in Islam is a very, very powerful thing, right? You have the whole tradition of the prophets. They define the best of leadership. And their leadership attributes become ethical leadership attributes, right? And they integrate directly into cyber, right? Which is something that Saudi Arabia, if they're willing and interested in actually defining, can actually be the leading, light in this world.
I would just, whatever I say about Saudi Arabia, it's not going to be enough for me. But I would say Saudi and the journey that it's been through, this is where it could add value to the rest of the world. If they show them the journey that we've been through, the challenges that we faced and then overcame, and the opportunities that we seized, I think this would be a great contribution to the cybersecurity field.
So thank you. I think we'll leave it there because our time is still on blank. That. We'll take some questions from the audience. We've probably got 5 minutes before you start getting kicked out of here. So any questions to the panel? There's one over here on the far right, or middle right.
Yes, hello. Thank you for this panel discussion. I just have a question, and I don't know if this is it's like out of the context, but when I found one of the questions there, Sean, you assumed the cybersecurity is for the professionals. What's the future for the cybersecurity for professionals in the 5 to 10 years? But my question is, what's next? So do you think maybe the cybersecurity one day we said it's outdated?
I can answer that one. As I mentioned earlier, there is a high competition, and if we look at the past 20 years, we have seen that technology is being developed to more than any other field, with a very high speed. So always remember that whenever you need to digitalize things, you need to secure it. Otherwise, it will be chaos. So it is not a major that will be trending for a while and it will stop. That will mean that we will stop one day developing all those information technology fields. So whenever you keep developing this niche field, the IT, you will need security attached to it. And what we have seen recently is we added a third layer, which is privacy as well, as Saudi Arabia just launched their personal data protection law. So it is not a framework anymore, it is a law. So if any organization fails to secure protecting personal data for their employees or clients, they will be liable to a big fine. So this field, and currently, name one university in the region that teaches privacy? None. So it is a new field, and it will be trending for a very long time because organizations will be liable or facing big fines.
But can I answer it in another angle? So an interesting book I read is called AI 2041. I really recommend it. It gives you 10 different scenarios for the future, how AI will look like. And one scenario, they talked about autonomous driving. So they said that maybe in 2041, driving will be illegal, meaning autonomous cars only. So humans driving will be illegal. And that's similar to cybersecurity. Maybe later on in the future, AI would be autonomous defense. Maybe people will not create the defense. You put the models, but then it will be autonomous alone.
That's a good answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, there's a question behind you, just there.
Are we now unemployed? Yes. Bugger.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Noor al-Barik, a PhD holder in Security and Distributed Computing from KFUBM and co-host and co-founder of podcast Kalam Cyber and Consultation Services. First of all, I would like to thank you for this insightful discussion, and it's a pleasure to meet such cybersecurity leaders like you. I have several things. I have one suggestion and another question. So actually, I have found that there is the national priority for cybersecurity is clearly mentioned. So the National Cybersecurity Authority has clearly mentioned their priority that spans between, for example, artificial intelligence for cybersecurity, quantum computing, cryptography, behavioral cybersecurity, and many things. But there's a need for a hub that combines between the industry and the academia. So one solution could be that the industry put the struggles or the challenges that they face throughout their work days, and the university and the students, whether they are bachelor students, master students, or even PhD students, they can, for example, look at these existing problems, and they are trying to think about how can we provide a solution based on existing problem for the industry. So they can save the time. So instead of searching for a problem in the literature, the problem is there, and they just do their work in terms of surveying the literature, find unique solutions, and developing the solution. Not only this, but also, as Arwa mentioned, we need to localize the solutions. So this will be, there are several advantages, including localizing the solutions, and as well as enhancing the cybersecurity market. So this will be a potential for the growing cybersecurity market in Saudi Arabia. Another thing is that I think, yes, you mentioned regarding using the AI for using AI in cybersecurity. During our podcast, we have several professional people in the cybersecurity field. 3 of them were from GRC, so they are GRC. 2 of them were consultant, and 1 of them GRC manager. And when we're trying to ask them about, for example, what tools do you use during your work, they said we usually use use the manual. We don't use existing tools. There are some existing tools, but we focus on manual analysis of risks, and this increase the time of finalizing the tasks. So my question is that, is there any efforts that have been done in automating GRC process using artificial intelligence? So this is my question. Thank you so much.
Maybe Arwa can give us perspective on that, because I think there is effort to automate the detection or the risk assessment or risk management process through ServiceNow or through other GRC tools, but haven't really, experienced any, tool that can automate the things, because usually risk assessment is qualitative, sorry. It's based on the judgment of the cybersecurity expert. They see the tool, they see the experience, the different, let's say, the different configurations or architecture of the domain, of the application, and they base their assessment on whether these controls are implemented, not implemented, what the inherited risk, what the residual risk after they implement the control, and they set up for mitigation strategy, whether they avoid or accept or mitigate or they transfer. So this is an area for improvement. I think researcher could collaborate with industry in developing an automation for the risk assessment process or risk management process at all. Yeah.
So we've actually been doing, well, I won't call it artificial intelligence. It was machine learning. So originally, IPS, right? So we go back 20 years, and we were trying to understand intrusion prevention. It was actually referred to as intrusion detection. And then someone came up with a smart idea, well, maybe we can put automatic blockers in, and that the system could learn from which areas were being hit the hardest. So IDS became acronym central, I'm sorry. IDS became IPS, then IPS, it just got worse. At least we're not like the Americans, we don't put numbers in as well. So the letters reflected that the systems were building off other systems and they were learning. So logs would teach other systems what to be watching for. The problem was environments would crash. Why? Because the machines got too clever and started closing down systems that the humans were still using legally. And so this was a problem. So where does AI take us now? The future of it, and there are a number of GIC systems which work automatically, and exactly as Munir said, it's all about controls. So you set up your controls, you'll set up a set of numbers, it'll all be set up in a range, everything works, I'm going to say symmetrically, mostly, and it all feeds, and it'll learn from itself. The key to AI is to say, okay, what controls are we not watching? So if your organization says, big banner across, we are ISO 27001 compliant. I'm a hacker, I'll go beauty. I know exactly what you're doing to meet 27001. So I know exactly what to hit that's not covered by 27001. So you end up with a contrary position, and AI is being used to evaluate contrary positions. So it's actually very good for red teaming, and it's very good for purple teaming. Blue, not so much, because they always have a hard time. But this is where this is going. So that's kind of like a little window of where we are now.
Should be. He's told me to shut up, I think.
Yeah,
Look,
it's happy hour.
It's already past our time, so I'm going to stop it there. Can I ask everybody to thank the panel, who's done an amazing job in answering those questions. Do I thank Claude for the questions, Hatif? So those questions were actually probably AI-generated questions, I'm guessing, but maybe not. Can we thank the panel, please? Okay, and I also have some certificates to hand out to the panel, so we'll get some photos and stuff like that while you guys run away. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here.
Let's see first.
Thank you all for your attention. We look forward to a productive and engaging day tomorrow. Thank you so much. Enjoy your day.